Australians travelling overseas are being urged to check their measles vaccination history and, if necessary, get an additional dose as authorities report a dramatic surge in new outbreaks. I spoke to Professor Alan Cheng, the Director of the Infection Prevention Unit at Alfred Health, a short time ago. Professor Cheng, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. There's been more than 170 notifications of measles in Australia so far this year. Is that a high number?
Look, it's higher than last year. Last year there were about 103 notifications for the whole of 2018, and this year there's been 177. But just to put that in context, in the early 90s there were thousands of cases, probably 4,000 cases of measles a year, and then obviously before we had vaccination in the 60s there were probably hundreds of thousands of cases. Overseas, New Zealand has had more than 1,200 cases just in Auckland alone, and certainly other countries overseas, the Ukraine and some other, Madagascar and some other countries have had very large numbers of cases. So 177 is an increase, but it's not big in the grand scheme of things.
We've seen, particularly in the last week or so, that there has been another outbreak in Australia. Is this latest one stemming from overseas?
Yeah, most of the cases we're seeing are return travellers, either Australians going overseas and bringing back measles, or people that are visitors from some of those countries. So most of them are linked in some way. There have certainly been transmissions within Australia, but the sort of common risk factor is people coming in from overseas.
Is it possible for other countries to crack down on measles?
I think everyone's doing their best. I think the reasons for these measles outbreaks in different countries is different. In Australia, we're not so concerned about anti-vaccination, as you've probably been hearing. It tends to be people that were born since 1966 only receiving one dose of vaccine, which gives them some protection but not complete protection, and that's a group that we're targeting at the moment.
Take us through some of the symptoms.
So measles is, the difficult part about measles is that it often starts with a very non-specific illness, so the rash and so on that is characteristics of measles doesn't really occur until the fourth or fifth day of illness. It actually starts with a sore throat, runny nose, and often conjunctivitis, so itchy or sore eyes. And with a fever as well. So those early symptoms are quite non-specific. And then on the fifth day, there's a rash that starts usually around the face and around the top, and then moving down into the body. People with measles tend to look fairly unwell, and before the rash, before the penny drops and the rash starts, a lot of these people can be admitted to hospital, or they may look pretty sick, and we might think it's something else. But usually by the time the rash starts, it becomes a bit more obvious.
Is anyone susceptible to getting measles, or is there a particular group that is most at risk?
So basically it's people that are not vaccinated or only received one dose of vaccination are somewhat susceptible. So people that received both doses of vaccine, and that's been routine since the early 90s, are pretty much protected. For those that were born between 1966 and the early 90s, so that's sort of people between about 20 years of age and about 53, we regard them as having some susceptibility because they didn't routinely get a second dose. And obviously the people of those group, the people that are most at risk are those that are travelling overseas to areas where there may be measles transmission. People born before 1966, so people over 53 years of age, were exposed to natural measles, and because it was so contagious, pretty much everyone got it at that time, at least in Australia. So we regard them as pretty much immune.
So what would be your advice then for Australians who are travelling overseas?
So I think measles vaccine should really be considered as part of routine pre-travel vaccines. So just as you might think of malaria and typhoid and hepatitis, measles should be on that list. If people have received 2 doses of vaccine, then that's fine. They don't need to get another one. If they've only received one, or if they don't know, which is probably most people, then there's no harm in getting another dose of measles vaccine to protect them. There's a couple of special groups, so pregnant women can't get the live vaccines, so the measles vaccine can't be given to pregnant women. So anyone that's contemplating getting pregnant, it's worth getting their shots early. And then the other group that's of concern is babies less than a year. So we normally don't start vaccinating children against measles until 1 year of age. There's now evidence that we can give a dose of measles vaccine at 6 months of age or between 6 and 12 months of age if they're going overseas, and that will give them partial protection until they get their next dose at 12 months. And then children below 6 months of age, we can't vaccinate them, and we really should think about whether those children should travel or not.